A nurse was unjustly fired for helping an elderly woman who was humbled and wearing dirty clothes. 5 days later, he was stunned to receive a call. As another workday came to a close at Sunrise Care Hospital, Damien Montgomery exchanged farewell greetings with his colleagues while reviewing the day's last notes. Fatigue was a constant companion resting on his shoulders. Damien's face bore the expression of someone bearing enormous responsibilities. He was the husband of Eleanor, a dedicated elementary school teacher, and father to Valeria, a beautiful 5-year-old girl. "Let's face a new day tomorrow, Damien," he encouraged himself in a low voice while changing in the locker room. His colleagues around him were already starting conversations about plans for the evening. "Thinking of hitting a party tonight, Damien?" one of them teased amid laughter. "No, tonight my company will be medical books and Valeria's school homework," Damien replied, offering a smile that mixed exhaustion and contentment. Committed to nursing, he harbored the dream of becoming a great doctor. Nights were times for intense study without neglecting care for his daughter. Eleanor, in turn, also split her time between her profession and household chores. At home, Damien strived to support his wife while dedicating himself as much as possible to his studies. As he walked to his car, parked within the hospital premises, Damien delved into reflections on his personal journey. Coming from a simple home, each step forward represented a significant effort. Being admitted to Sunrise Care Hospital, a prestigious institution in his city, was a significant milestone. "You have a bright future ahead of you, Damien. Never doubt it." The memory of his father's voice, now deceased, was a constant comfort and encouragement. Starting his car, he called Eleanor. "Hello, my love, I'm on my way. Need anything?" he inquired affectionately. On the other side of the line, Eleanor's sweet voice responded, "No need, love. Come safely. Valeria can hardly wait to show you the drawing she made at school today." Arriving home, he was greeted with a warm, "Good evening" from Eleanor, who was preparing dinner. "How was your day, dear?" she asked, turning to him with a smile that brightened the room. "The day was good, Eleanor," Damien shared, with a smile hiding his fatigue. "I was eager to get this job at Sunrise Care. You know how essential money is, especially now with the costs of Hazel's treatment." "Of course, my love, I see how hard you work," Eleanor said, looking at him with a gaze full of empathy. "And how was it at the hospital? You seem worried." With a deep sigh, Damien vented about the demands of his supervisor, Dr. Harrison. "He's very strict, and I feel like nothing I do is enough. He seems to be always upset with everything and everyone," Damien confided. "But that's why you're studying to be a doctor, isn't it? To be able to do more for Hazel and other patients," Eleanor reminded him as they served dinner. "Yes, it's true. Every day I spend at that hospital I learn more, and it gives me more strength to continue with my studies," Damien agreed with a thankful smile. After dinner, while Eleanor tidied up the kitchen, Damien went to Hazel's room, who was already asleep. As he looked at her, sleeping like an angel, not seeming to be ill, he felt a wave of determination. "I'll do everything to give you a better life, my little one," he promised silently. At that moment, the exhaustion gave way to a renewed sense of purpose. Damien knew the journey would be long and difficult, but looking at Hazel, he was sure it would be worth it. The following morning, Damien woke up before dawn, preparing himself for another challenging day. Before going to work, he had a crucial appointment, taking Hazel to a routine medical checkup. The calm atmosphere of the morning gave no hint of the storm of worries forming in his mind. Arriving at the pediatric hospital, Damien held Hazel's small hand, trying to hide his anxiety. The consultation proceeded as usual until the doctor gave them unexpected news. "Hazel's treatment needs to be intensified," the doctor explained. "This means a more effective but also more expensive medication that we need to import." Damien's heart sank. How could he afford these additional costs? On the way back home, Damien was absorbed in thoughts. He began to consider all possibilities to increase his income. "Maybe I can take extra shifts at the hospital, or do additional jobs on weekends like taking care of neighbors' gardens," he thought, desperate to find a solution. The concern was visible on his face, while Hazel, oblivious to adult problems, hummed a children's song in the back seat of the car. Leaving Hazel at home with Eleanor, Damien rushed to Sunrise Care Hospital. The urgency of the moment made him lose track of time, and he arrived 5 minutes late. As soon as he entered, he was confronted by Dr. Harrison. "Damien Montgomery, you are late," Dr. Harrison said with a tone of disapproval. Damien tried to explain. "Dr. Harrison, I had an important medical appointment with my daughter this morning. But he was interrupted by Dr. Harrison, who coldly said, "Damien, you are new here. No matter the reason, we expect punctuality. This cannot happen again." Damien nodded, holding back the frustration and worry that threatened to overflow. After a tumultuous start to the morning, the rest of Damien's day at Sunrise Care Hospital went without further incidents. He dedicated himself to each patient with the attention and care he always valued in his work. The hospital, known for its excellence and affluent clientele, maintained an atmosphere of calm and sophistication. During his brief rest period, Damien retreated to a small room reserved for workers, seeking a moment of tranquility amid the chaos of his day. While resting, Damien's thoughts drifted between concern for Hazel and pressure at work. He wished for just a few minutes of peace before resuming his tasks. However, this brief moment of calm was interrupted by unusual activity coming from the reception. Curious and concerned, Damien decided to check what was happening. Upon arriving at the reception, he encountered a chaotic scene. An elderly lady, dressed in dirty and humble clothes, was clearly in distress. She could barely stand and asked for help with a weak and trembling voice. The receptionist, Violet, looked at the lady with an expression of discomfort. "Please, I need documents or your health insurance card to assist you," Violet said, trying to maintain her composure. The lady, gasping and visibly ill, responded with difficulty, I don't have my documents. Please help me." Her voice was a desperate whisper and she seemed on the verge of fainting. Violet, visibly bothered, replied, "I'm sorry, but this is a private hospital. You need to seek a public hospital. We can't assist you here without the necessary documents." "Please call Dr. Aurora Campbell," the lady pleaded with a weak voice. "She works here. She can help me." Dr. Aurora Campbell was a renowned doctor in the region, known for her exceptional skills and commitment to medicine. Violet, the receptionist, heard the lady's request and responded with a look of disdain. "I can't bother Dr. Mendoza, our most important doctor, for someone without documents or health insurance. Please seek a public hospital. If you don't leave, I'll have to call security." Her voice was firm, emphasizing the hospital's strict policy. The lady, increasingly weak, leaned on the counter, struggling to stay conscious. Damien, watching this scene in disbelief, felt a great indignation. He knew the hospital was exclusive, but the woman's condition was clearly critical. Where was the oath that all doctors take upon graduating? Without a second thought, he approached. "Wait, I can help," he said, addressing the lady. "Let's take her to one of the consultation rooms and see what's going on." Violet looked at him surprised, mumbling something about hospital policies, but Damien was already helping the lady walk toward one of the consultation rooms. He knew he might face consequences for his action, but the need to help someone in distress spoke louder. Damien, with a mix of concern and determination, held the lady by the arm, guiding her carefully to an empty consultation room. She was visibly weak, barely able to keep her eyes open, and her breathing was labored. "Stay calm. Everything will be all right." Damien spoke in a gentle tone, trying to soothe her as he opened the door to the consultation room. Once inside the consultation room, the lady asked Damien with visible effort, "Are you a doctor?" He replied as he helped her sit on a reclining chair. "No, I'm a nurse, but I'm studying hard to be a doctor one day. I haven't been working here long, but I'm good at what I do." He spoke with a mix of humility and pride while quickly assessing the lady's condition. Damien noticed the lady was experiencing a drop in blood pressure and suspected a cardiac issue. "I'm going to check your pressure and give you something to stabilize it," he said, fetching a sphygmomanometer and a stethoscope. As he performed the procedure, he talked to her, trying to keep her conscious and calm. After measuring the pressure and performing a brief auscultation, Damien administered medication to stabilize the lady's blood pressure. "This should help with your pressure, but you need a more detailed examination, especially for your heart," he explained with evident concern in his voice. He then decided to take her to the staff restroom, a more secluded place where she wouldn't attract the attention of the hospital's administration or other patients. "Stay here until I finish my shift. I'll come back to see how you're doing and help in any way I can," Damien assured, covering her with a blanket to ensure her comfort. The lady, now a bit more stable, looked at Damien with gratitude. "Thank you, young man, you are an angel," she said with a weak but sincere voice. Damien smiled slightly, relieved to have been able to help, but aware he still had a long day ahead. He left the room, quietly closing the door behind him, and returned to his duties, worried but hopeful he could do more for the lady later. At the end of his shift, Damien was abruptly called to Dr. Harrison's office, his boss. He entered the office, an imposing space that reflected Dr. Harrison's authority at the hospital. Sitting behind a large desk, Dr. Harrison looked at Damien with a stern expression. "Damien Montgomery, once again Violet informed me about today's incident. You treated an elderly woman without documents and worse, without means to pay. This is unacceptable," Dr. Harrison began, in a tone that left no room for rebuttal. "You allowed someone of lower level into the hospital without authorization and even used our resources to treat her." Damien, maintaining his composure, tried to explain. "Dr. Harrison, I understand the hospital's policy, but that lady needed help. Every human being deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their social status. I'm willing to cover the cost of the care, even if it means deducting it from my salary." Dr. Harrison, however, didn't let Damien finish. "Damien, what you did goes against all our rules. This isn't just about money, it's about principle. You're fired. You can leave now." Dr. Harrison's voice was cold, making it clear there was no room for discussion or appeal. Damien felt a mix of indignation and desolation. He knew he was doing the right thing in helping the lady, but now he was facing the consequences of his actions. He stood up, giving Dr. Harrison one last look, and left the office in silence. Walking towards the restroom where he had left the lady, Damien was engulfed in a cloud of concerns. He wondered how he would support his family and take care of his daughter now that he had lost his job. The responsibility weighed heavily on his shoulders, but at the moment, he knew he needed to focus on the well-being of the lady he had helped. Upon arriving at the room, he found the lady asleep, her breathing now more stable. Gently, Damien woke her up. "I'm sorry to wake you, but I need to talk to you," he said softly. The lady slowly opened her eyes, seeming a bit stronger than before. "How are you feeling?" Damien asked, genuinely concerned. The lady looked at him with gratitude. "I'm feeling better, thanks to you," she replied, "but I don't want to cause any more trouble. I can leave now." Damien, however, insisted. "I can't let you go like this. Please come with me to my home. I insist. You need a place to rest and recover." She hesitated, but Damien's sincere concern convinced her. "All right, I accept your kindness," she said with a still weak voice. "But this didn't cause you any trouble, did it? Your boss, he didn't complain to you?" Damien paused for a moment, considering how to respond. "My boss is a difficult person to deal with, that's true," Damien began. "He was transferred here not long ago and has been strict with the hospital's rules. But don't worry about that now. What's important is that you're okay." He tried to keep a neutral tone, avoiding revealing the truth about his firing. Damien then helped Mrs. Evelyn to her feet and accompanied her to the hospital exit. He felt a mix of emotions, concern for his own future, satisfaction for doing the right thing, and some relief for leaving behind such a rigid work environment. As they walked slowly, Damien thought about how he would explain the situation to Eleanor and how they would face the challenges that lay ahead. While Damien drove, Mrs. Evelyn sat beside him, looking timidly out the window. The silence was only broken by the soft hum of the engine and the occasional noise of the city passing by outside. Damien broke the silence. "I hope you like the food my wife makes. She's preparing a nice dinner with lots of care. I've already told her about you. She's a very understanding and welcoming woman." Mrs. Evelyn turned to him, a bit apprehensive. "Your wife won't be upset about receiving a surprise visitor like me?" she asked with a fragile voice. Damien smiled lightly. "No, of course not. Eleanor has always been an amazing woman. Plus, she has a big heart, don't worry." The car continued on its way, and Mrs. Evelyn seemed to lose herself in thought, looking at the streets moving by outside. "What's your name?" Damien asked, trying to keep the conversation light. "My name is Evelyn," she answered. "Mrs. Evelyn." Damien then gently asked, "Do you have family, Mrs. Evelyn?" She sighed, a look of melancholy crossing her face. "No, I'm alone now, a widow. Life has taken me down lonely paths." Damien noticed the sadness in her voice and decided not to pursue more questions. He understood that everyone carries their own pains and didn't want to intrude on her privacy. When Damien and Mrs. Evelyn entered the house, they were greeted by Eleanor's warm smile. She welcomed them without showing any sign of surprise or discomfort, despite being unaware of Damien's dismissal. He, for his part, remained calm and collected, not revealing what had happened at the hospital. Eleanor approached Mrs. Evelyn with natural kindness. "Welcome to our home," she said with a welcoming smile. "My name is Eleanor." Mrs. Evelyn, a bit shy but clearly touched by the warm reception, introduced herself. "Thank you very much. My name is Evelyn, but everyone calls me Mrs. Evelyn." Eleanor, always attentive and helpful, had set aside some clean clothes for Mrs. Evelyn. "They're not new, but they're very clean," Eleanor explained, handing the clothes to Mrs. Evelyn. "I hope they're comfortable for you." Mrs. Evelyn thanked her, visibly moved by such kindness. Moreover, Eleanor had prepared a space for Mrs. Evelyn in the living room, arranging the sofa with a clean and fragrant blanket. "You can sleep here tonight. We want you to feel at home," Eleanor said, showing the sofa. Mrs. Evelyn started to refuse, not wanting to cause any trouble, but Damien intervened. "We insist, Mrs. Evelyn. It's important to me to monitor your health tonight. Tomorrow you can decide what to do." Mrs. Evelyn, still a bit hesitant, accepted the offer. She had never been treated with such consideration and kindness before. The hospitality of Eleanor and Damien's genuine concern made her feel valued and respected. As Eleanor served dinner, Damien and Mrs. Evelyn sat in the living room. He discreetly watched over her, ensuring she was comfortable and safe. The atmosphere in Damien and Eleanor's home was one of human warmth and care, a stark contrast to the cold and impersonal environment of the hospital from which Damien had been dismissed. Mrs. Evelyn, sitting on the sofa, looked around, feeling grateful and welcomed, a rare feeling in her life in recent years. After dinner, the household's routine unfolded quietly. Damien and Eleanor put Hazel to bed, ensuring the little one was comfortable and sleepy. Then they went to check on Mrs. Evelyn. Seated on the sofa, she expressed her gratitude with simple words but laden with emotion. "Thank you for everything you're doing for me," she said, her words echoing sincerity. With Mrs. Evelyn seemingly asleep, Damien and Eleanor headed to the kitchen for a more private conversation. They spoke in low voices, careful not to disturb the night's tranquility. "Eleanor, something happened at the hospital today," Damien began hesitantly. He recounted every detail of the day, from Mrs. Evelyn's arrival to his dismissal. Eleanor listened intently, her expression alternating between concern and understanding. When Damien finished, she placed her hand on his. "You did the right thing, Damien. Helping someone in need is always the right path. God will show us a way," she said, her voice full of faith and hope. Meanwhile, from the sofa, Mrs. Evelyn was awake, listening to every word of the conversation. She had tried to sleep, but the turmoil in her mind kept her awake. Hearing about Damien's dismissal and Eleanor's concern, her heart tightened. She felt guilty for being the cause of such trouble for this generous and kind family. "The worst part," Damien continued, "is that the cost of our Hazel's treatment is increasing, Eleanor." "I don't know how we're going to manage now," said Damien, his voice laden with concern. Eleanor, despite the visible anxiety on her face, tried to maintain hope. "We will find a way to take care of our little one. God has never abandoned us, and he won't now," she replied, drawing strength from the depths of her faith to face this new adversity. Hearing those words, Mrs. Evelyn felt an even heavier weight on her heart. The concern Damien and Eleanor had for their daughter's future and the financial impact of his dismissal was very sad. "This is all my fault. If he hadn't helped me, he would still have his job," Mrs. Evelyn thought. The feeling of sadness and responsibility overwhelmed her, leaving her immersed in thoughts about how her presence had complicated the life of this family. After a restless night listening to Damien and Eleanor's worries, Mrs. Evelyn fell asleep, her thoughts still revolving around the conversation she had overheard. When the morning arrived, bringing with it the first rays of sunlight that crept through the window, she woke up feeling a bit more stable but still laden with thoughts. Damien was the first to check on her. Finding her awake, he kindly asked, "How are you feeling this morning, Mrs. Evelyn?" She replied with a slight smile, "A bit better, thank you for your concern." Damien noticed she seemed calmer, though she still carried a thoughtful expression. Eleanor, always attentive, invited Mrs. Evelyn to have breakfast with them. The aroma of fresh coffee and toasted bread filled the kitchen, creating a warm atmosphere. Despite the challenges they faced, the couple continued to treat Mrs. Evelyn with exceptional kindness. Sitting at the table with them, Mrs. Evelyn could hardly believe such generous and welcoming people existed. During breakfast, Mrs. Evelyn expressed her gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for me, but I think it's time for me to go," she said, her voice loaded with gratitude and a certain reluctance to leave. Eleanor, with her usual generosity, responded, "You can stay with us as long as you need, Mrs. Evelyn." But Mrs. Evelyn insisted, "I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart, but I can't stay any longer." Understanding her decision, Damien offered money for the taxi. "I know you lost your wallet with all your documents. Please accept this for the taxi fare," he said, extending some bills. Mrs. Evelyn hesitated, but eventually accepted. "I will repay you as soon as I can," she promised. Damien smiled kindly. "Don't worry about it." With a heart full of gratitude and a mind still concerned, Mrs. Evelyn bid farewell to the couple. She left that morning, but that goodbye definitely wasn't the end of their recent friendship. Returning to the daily routine, Damien faced the new reality of being unemployed. He began the journey of looking for a new job, distributing resumes at various hospitals in Guadalajara. Each submission was accompanied by a hope mixed with anxiety. In each hospital, he left not just a piece of paper, but also the hope for an opportunity that could change the difficult situation he found himself in. While waiting for responses, Damien didn't stand still. He began to organize himself to offer small services in nearby neighborhoods, like mowing lawns or doing minor repairs. "Maybe I can help with something around here," he told neighbors, trying to find ways to bring some money home. Each task completed brought him a small financial relief, but the concern for the future remained. With the last paycheck he received from the hospital, Damien bought 2 boxes of the necessary medication for Hazel, enough to cover 2 months of treatment. As he organized the medicines, he thought, "I need to find a solution before these run out. Hazel can't be without her medication, and the money Eleanor makes at the school is only enough for our food and the installment on our little house. I need to act fast to save my family." The responsibility of caring for his daughter's health weighed on his shoulders, mixing with the fear of the unknown. Despite being focused on solving immediate problems, Damien couldn't stop worrying about Mrs. Evelyn. He often wondered if she had safely reached her destination. "I hope Mrs. Evelyn is doing well and that the Lord guides her steps and her health, and if it's your will, Father, I hope to see her again," he murmured in his nightly prayers. Damien and Eleanor, despite the challenges, maintained a strong bond. They supported each other, finding strength in one another. "We'll get through this together. We're strong. We can work on whatever is necessary. I don't mind doing 2 shifts as long as our daughter gets her treatment." "I'm with you, my love. We'll get through this like we always have," Eleanor said, trying to keep an optimistic demeanor. Damien, though worried, felt strengthened by his wife's presence and support. At dawn, the sound of the phone cut through the silence of Damien's house, awakening him from his morning thoughts. With his heart racing at the possibility of a response to the numerous resumes he had distributed, he rushed to answer. It could be an interview, he thought, with a mix of hope and anxiety. On the other end of the line, a deep and polite voice asked, "Good morning, am I speaking with Damien Montgomery?" Damien confirmed, trying to contain the nervousness in his voice. "Yes, this is me. How can I help?" The voice replied, "I'm Dr. Gilbert from the Human Resources Department of a hospital. We're interested in your profile and would like to invite you for an interview." Damien could hardly believe what he was hearing. "An interview? Are you sure it's for me?" he asked, almost stuttering. "Yes, Mr. Damien. We are impressed with your experience and would like to discuss it in person." Damien's excitement grew with each word. Then Dr. Gilbert provided the address for the interview, and to Damien's surprise, it was the address of Sunrise Care Hospital, his former place of work. Confused, he interrupted, "Sorry, could you repeat the address? It seems to be the same as Sunrise Care Hospital, where I used to work." Dr. Gilbert calmly confirmed, "Exactly, Mr. Damien, Sunrise Care Hospital." Damien was stunned. "But I was working there until recently. I was dismissed," he said, trying to understand the situation. Dr. Gilbert responded, "I'm aware of your previous situation, Mr. Damien, but we'd like to speak with you again if you're interested, of course." Damien felt a mix of emotions, surprise, and a bit of distrust. He didn't want to go back to working in such an elitist place, but in his current situation, how could he choose? "This is, unbelievable," he said in a somewhat disheartened but firm tone. "Of course I accept the interview. When should I attend?" he asked, still trying to process how this could be happening. Dr. Gilbert provided the details of the interview, saying he should come the following morning, and then said goodbye. After hanging up the phone, Damien remained still for a moment. The situation was very odd, but he was indeed going to that interview. Hazel was more important than anything. When Eleanor came home later that day, Damien couldn't wait to share the news of the call he had received. As soon as she entered, he rushed to meet her, his expression radiating a mix of nervousness and excitement. "Eleanor, you won't believe it. I received a phone call this morning," he began, barely containing his anxiety. Eleanor, noticing Damien's agitation, responded with a look of curiosity. "What happened? Any news?" Damien quickly explained about Dr. Gilbert's call and the invitation for an interview back at Sunrise Care Hospital. Hearing this, Eleanor's face lost some of its glow. "Damien, that's the hospital that dismissed you. They don't care about everyone, just those who have a lot of money." Damien nodded, understanding his wife's concerns. "I know, Eleanor, and I agree with you. But right now we need to think about Hazel. Her treatment is getting more and more expensive, and this job could help us cover the costs. I hate having to go back to such a toxic environment, but I'll do whatever it takes for our family." He spoke with a firm voice, but his eyes showed he wasn't happy. Eleanor, after a moment of reflection, agreed with a slight nod. "You're right, Damien, our priority is Hazel. But as soon as we can, we should look for something better," she said with a serene determination in her voice, albeit a bit reluctantly. Damien understood Eleanor's stance. "I promise this is a temporary solution. As soon as a better opportunity arises, I'll seize it." Right after they finished talking, Damien and Eleanor noticed that Hazel, who had been quietly playing in a corner of the room, had a high fever. Eleanor, with a mix of concern and nervousness, quickly said, "Damien, we have to take her to the hospital now. She's very hot." Without wasting time, they picked up Hazel in their arms and rushed to the pediatric hospital where she had always been treated. Upon arrival at the hospital, the situation of little Hazel was quickly assessed by the medical team. Seeing the severity, they rushed her into an emergency room, leaving Damien and Eleanor outside, filled with anxiety and fear. The hospital corridor seemed endlessly long and silent as they waited for news. Hours passed, each minute feeling like an eternity to the anxious parents. Finally, the doctor who attended Hazel appeared. With a serious expression, he informed, "Your daughter has experienced a significant deterioration. We'll need to admit her for monitoring and intensive treatment." The doctor's words struck Damien and Eleanor hard. Damien, trying to stay calm, asked, "But she's going to be okay, right?" The doctor replied, "We're going to do everything in our power. She's in good hands, but we need to act quickly." Damien nodded, feeling a mix of confidence and fear in the medical team's abilities. While Eleanor followed the doctor to see Hazel, Damien sat in one of the chairs in the corridor, his mind swirling with 1,000 thoughts. His daughter's health was his greatest concern, but the financial reality also haunted him. How are we going to pay for this? It's not covered by her health plan, he thought, feeling a tremendous weight on his heart. Damien remembered the job he had lost and the interview he had scheduled at Sunrise Care Hospital. I need this job more than ever now, he murmured to himself. His family's situation seemed increasingly desperate, and he felt the pressure to find a solution. Alone in the hospital corridor, Damien closed his eyes and offered a silent prayer, asking for strength and a way forward. That night, while Eleanor stayed at the hospital beside Hazel's bed, Damien went home carrying the weight of his worries. Before leaving, he briefly spoke with Eleanor. I'm going home to prepare for the interview tomorrow. You stay here with Hazel. I'll be back as soon as I finish. Eleanor, though worried about her daughter, knew the importance of that interview. Go, Damien, we need this. I'll stay here with her. Good luck, she said, with a look that mixed anxiety and hope. Damien barely slept that night. His thoughts were torn between concern for Hazel's health and the interview that could be the key to a turning point in his life. At dawn, he got up early, took a quick shower, and put on his best suit, reserved for special occasions. Looking at himself in the mirror, he tried to gather all the confidence he could muster. As he got ready, the image of Hazel in the hospital flooded his mind. I have to get this job, he thought, determined. For her, for Eleanor, for our family. With that thought in mind, he left the house, closing the door behind him with a renewed sense of purpose. On his way to Sunrise Care Hospital, Damien rehearsed in his mind possible questions and answers for the interview. He knew this opportunity was crucial, and didn't want to leave anything to chance. "I have to show I'm the right candidate for the job despite what happened," he murmured to himself, trying to focus only on the interview. Upon arriving at the hospital, he was greeted by Dr. Gilbert, who shook his hand firmly. "Good morning, Mr. Damien. Thank you for coming. We're eager to talk to you." Damien thanked him and smiled politely, looking closely at Dr. Gilbert but not recognizing him. It was the first time he had seen this man, which left him somewhat disoriented. "Where is Dr. Harrison, the chief who fired me?" Damien thought as he walked through the familiar corridors of the hospital. With each step he noticed small changes. The atmosphere seemed different, less tense, and even the decor had changed slightly. As he walked, Damien noticed the absence of familiar faces. Violet, the receptionist who had refused to help Mrs. Evelyn, was not at her usual post. Maybe she got promoted. She was very close to Harrison, he murmured to himself, surprised by the changes. The idea that in elite hospitals like Sunrise Care, teams could be swapped according to the whims of the administration crossed his mind. Following Dr. Gilbert, Damien was led to a large meeting room. Entering, he found himself surrounded by several people seated around a long table. There were unfamiliar faces, all dressed formally, looking at him with a mix of curiosity and expectation. Damien, confused, looked to Dr. Gilbert for some explanation. Dr. Gilbert, noticing Damien's confusion, smiled and said, "Mr. Damien, let me introduce you to the new management team of Sunrise Care Hospital. We've had some significant changes recently." Damien, still trying to absorb the information, greeted the group timidly. Still trying to understand what was happening, Damien looked around the room, trying to connect faces to the roles they played in this new scenario at Sunrise Care Hospital. Then his eyes landed on a familiar yet unexpectedly different figure. Seated at the head of the table was a lady dressed elegantly, exuding an aura of authority and benevolence. Damien blinked several times, not believing what he saw. It can't be, he thought. Before Damien could verbalize his surprise, Dr. Gilbert spoke. "Indeed, Mr. Damien, this is Mrs. Evelyn Hernandez, the owner of Sunrise Care Hospital." Dr. Gilbert's words sounded like thunder in his ears. Damien looked at the lady, his mind spinning in 1,000 directions. Mrs. Evelyn Hernandez, whom Damien had met under such humble and vulnerable circumstances, now revealed herself as the owner of the hospital. She observed him with a serene gaze and a slight smile. "Damien, it's good to see you again and under such different circumstances," she said, her voice carrying both power and kindness. Damien, still shaken by the revelation, managed to stammer a response. "Mrs. Evelyn, I had no idea. How is this possible?" His voice was filled with incredulity. Mrs. Evelyn Hernandez, noticing Damien's confusion, stood up with calm elegance. "Mr. Damien, I see you're puzzled. Let me explain," she began, her serene voice immediately drawing everyone's attention in the room. "On the day you helped me, everything happened by accident. I was at a shelter for children where I volunteer and donate," explained Mrs. Evelyn, her voice reflecting a tone of sincerity and humility. "It was cleaning day, and that's why I was in such a state, dirty and disheveled. I don't usually visit my hospital often. After years dedicated to healthcare work, especially after becoming a widow with no children, I chose to focus my energies elsewhere. This hospital was already a reference point, and I have a huge team that takes care of everything for me," she continued, with everyone in the room listening intently. "But back to that specific day, I decided to walk home, an unusual choice since my driver is usually always with me. But I gave him the day off. Unfortunately, the physical effort at the shelter was more than I expected, and as I have a condition of high blood pressure, I started to feel unwell." Mrs. Evelyn paused, remembering that day. "My hospital was coincidentally very close, so I went there hoping to be helped. But as I rarely visited it, and that day I didn't have my documents with me, the hospital staff did not recognize me and did not help me. And before I could explain who I was treated very poorly, and regardless of who I was, that's not how any human being should be treated." She looked directly at Damien. "That's when you appeared, Damien. Without knowing who I was, you showed me kindness and compassion. You treated me with dignity and respect, something that unfortunately I didn't receive from the staff of my own hospital, which I built with so much work and effort." Damien listened, completely absorbed in Mrs. Evelyn's story. He remembered that day, the fragile and ill woman who had arrived at the hospital, and now saw the same woman before him, revealing herself as the owner of the place. Mrs. Evelyn Hernandez, with an introspective expression, continued to narrate her story to Damien and the others present in the room. That day, I realized a grave mistake I had made by leaving the hospital in the hands of a director who hired people who did not share the values I always cherished, she began, her voice denoting a mix of sadness and determination. Since the foundation of this hospital, my instruction was always clear. All patients should be treated with dignity and respect regardless of their financial condition. Even being a private hospital, I always made sure we offered humane and inclusive care, explained Mrs. Evelyn. Her posture was that of someone who had dedicated their life to caring for others. Unfortunately, during the years I stepped away from direct management, things changed. The hospital I built with principles of compassion and equality turned into a petty and elitist place, she said with a distant look. What I saw and experienced as a patient that day was a shock to me. The way I was treated was the opposite of what I always dreamed for Sunrise Care. She paused, looking around the room. It was a painful lesson, but necessary. I realized I needed to reassume my role in managing the hospital and bring back the values I always defended. The sincerity in her voice touched everyone in the room, conveying the gravity of her words. Damien, still absorbing the magnitude of that revelation, expressed his surprise and confusion. Mrs. Evelyn, why didn't you reveal who you were when you started to feel better? I'm not angry, just... I don't understand, he said, his voice reflecting genuine perplexity. Mrs. Evelyn responded with thoughtful calmness. Damien, after being cared for by you, I felt that not everything was lost at Sunrise Care. I saw in you an incredible human being, someone who embodied the values I always cherished. If I had revealed my identity at that moment, it could alter the pure and genuine nature of our interaction. I wanted to learn more about you, about the hospital through your eyes, without influences. Damien nodded slowly, beginning to understand. So all this made sense. Your choice to remain anonymous was a way to preserve the true nature of our interaction at that moment, he said, reflecting on the events. Mrs. Evelyn continued with a more serious tone of voice. Moreover, Damien, I unintentionally heard the conversation you had with your wife about your daughter's illness and about your dismissal. I apologize for that. It wasn't my intention to listen, but it was the final straw that made me act. I knew I needed to intervene in the hospital to restore the values it had lost. She paused for a moment, looking at Damien with a mix of empathy and determination. What you went through and the concerns for your daughter, my heart was moved. I couldn't stand by knowing that people like you who bring compassion and humanity to medicine were being pushed away. Mrs. Evelyn Hernandez, with a determined expression, continued to explain the changes she had implemented at Sunrise Care Hospital. After everything that happened, I decided to return to the hospital and make some significant changes. I believe the culture of a hospital starts with the people who work there. I rehired my old and loyal friend, Dr. Gilbert, to take over the management of the hospital again. He is a man of strong values and kindness, someone I've always trusted to maintain the principles I set for Sunrise Care, she said, looking at Dr. Gilbert with a nod of mutual respect. Mrs. Evelyn went on. As for Dr. Harrison, the receptionist, and others who were misaligned with our principles, I made the decision to let them go. It was crucial that we restored the original spirit of compassion and excellence that always defined this hospital. Her voice was firm, reflecting the seriousness of her actions. She then turned back to Damien. After reorganizing the team, I asked Dr. Gilbert to contact you. We have a proposal to make. Mrs. Evelyn paused, looking at Damien with an expression of expectation. I am 75 years old and no longer have the strength and energy I once had. I do not wish to spend the remaining years of my life entirely within the walls of this hospital. So, Damien, we want to know if you accept the position of head nurse, with direct training under Dr. Gilbert's supervision. The goal is to prepare you to eventually take over the management of Sunrise Care Hospital when you're ready. Mrs. Evelyn watched Damien attentively, waiting for his response. Damien, still trying to process the reality of the moment, felt as if he was in a dream. Is this really happening? He asked himself, his voice laden with emotion. When Mrs. Evelyn confirmed the proposal, he accepted immediately, without hesitation. This is more than a dream come true. It's something I never imagined possible, he said, his voice trembling with emotion. His eyes filled with tears, a reflection of the joy and gratitude he felt. Mrs. Evelyn, observing Damien's reaction, smiled with satisfaction. "I am very happy, Damien. Now I truly feel relieved to leave the hospital in the hands of good people like you." The compassion and sincerity in her voice were evident. Then, with a gesture that surprised Damien even more, Mrs. Evelyn pulled out a check from her bag. "I have one more thing for you, Damien," she said, handing him the check. "This is to cover the complete treatment of Hazel at the best pediatric hospital with everything she's entitled to. I want to ensure that your daughter receives the best possible care and finds a cure as soon as possible." Damien, holding the check in his hands, felt an overwhelming wave of emotions. Tears streamed down his face as he looked at Mrs. Evelyn, incredulous. I don't know what to say. This is more than I could ever ask for or imagine," he stammered, his voice choked with emotion. Damien looked around the room, seeing the faces of those present, all touched by the scene. Dr. Gilbert, with a kind smile, nodded in approval, recognizing the nobility of Mrs. Evelyn's gesture. Damien, with the check in hand, felt profound gratitude. "Mrs. Evelyn, Dr. Gilbert, I promise to honor this trust and do everything in my power to live up to this opportunity, and I have no words to thank you for what you're doing for my daughter." His words were sincere, laden with a promise of endless dedication and gratitude. Leaving the meeting room, Damien felt completely shocked, his hands trembling and his mind racing. He needed to share the news with Eleanor immediately. Grabbing his cell phone, he called her, and as soon as she answered, the words poured out of his mouth, a mix of joy and disbelief. "Eleanor, you won't believe what happened," he said, breathless with emotion. On the other end of the line, Eleanor listened attentively, tears of emotion beginning to form in her eyes. "Damien, what happened? Are you okay?" she asked, concerned. Damien, still trying to catch his breath, explained everything, from the job offer to the check for Hazel's treatment. "Eleanor, our lives are going to change. Mrs. Evelyn, she paid for Hazel's treatment, and I'm going to be the head nurse with the prospect of managing the hospital in the future." Eleanor, on the other end of the line, began to cry with relief and happiness. "That's incredible, Damien. It's a miracle. How is this possible?" she exclaimed, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know, Eleanor. It feels like a dream." A gesture of kindness turned into this surreal turnaround. Damien replied, still in a state of shock. Both felt as if a ton had been lifted from their shoulders. In the following days, Damien assumed his new position at Sunrise Care Hospital. He could see that things had indeed changed for the better. There was a new spirit in the air, an energy of renewal and compassion that permeated the corridors and rooms of the hospital. Inspired by this new phase, Damien made a proposal to Mrs. Evelyn. "Mrs. Evelyn, I have an idea. How about we open a separate wing of the hospital to serve needy people? We could offer quality treatment for free or at a very reduced cost." Mrs. Evelyn listened to Damien's proposal with attention, a gleam of approval in her eyes. "Damien, that's a wonderful idea," she replied, excited. "Let's do it. I'll allocate the necessary budget for the construction of a community hospital next to Sunrise Care. It won't be just a wing, it will be a place where those in need can receive quality care without worrying about costs." Mrs. Evelyn's decision was celebrated as an innovative step and an example of social responsibility in the healthcare sector. The project for the community hospital quickly took shape, with Damien working side by side with Mrs. Evelyn and Dr. Gilbert to ensure everything went according to plan. The dream of accessible and quality healthcare was becoming a reality, and Damien felt deeply grateful and moved to be part of this change. He knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter, both for Sunrise Care Hospital and for the community it would serve. On the day of the opening of the new hospital, named Hazel Hospital in honor of Damien's daughter, emotion filled the air. Mrs. Evelyn Hernandez, with a look of pride and contentment, took the podium to make her speech. The sky was clear, and a gentle breeze accompanied her words, touching deeply all those present. "Dear friends and colleagues, today is not just the opening of a hospital, but the celebration of a principle that should guide us all. Helping without looking at whom," began Mrs. Evelyn, her voice strong, echoing through the space. "This hospital is the fruit of a simple act of kindness, a genuine gesture of care for a stranger which transformed lives and reignited the flame of hope and humanity in our hearts. May Hazel Hospital be a beacon of compassion, a place where every person who passes through its doors feels the power of healing that comes not only from medicine but also from love and solidarity." Damien and Eleanor were there, witnessing the birth of a dream that began with a simple act of kindness and now materialized in the form of Hazel Hospital, a legacy of love, care, and humanity. It was a moment they would forever hold dear, a poignant reminder of the power of compassion and the change that a single gesture can bring. If you've loved this story, I invite you to express your enjoyment with a like and join our community by subscribing to the channel. Your support inspires us to continue bringing thrilling stories almost every day. Don't miss out on the next extraordinary narration that is now appearing on your screen. We greatly value your support. See you soon.
They said no one but family is allowed in the house. On a scorching hot day, I went to visit my married daughter, only to find her emerging from a storage shed in her in-laws' yard, looking terribly thin. Inside, I saw a thin mattress on the floor. Can you believe it? They were making her sleep in a shed where the temperature soared above 105 degrees Fahrenheit. How dare they treat my daughter this way? I'll never forgive them. After hearing everything, I was livid. I took her away, and we disappeared. As a result, her in-laws turned pale and ended up shaking like leaves. My name is Nancy. I'm 60 years old and work as a clerk at a local company. I was widowed when I was young and raised my daughter, Sophia, single-handedly. We faced many challenges, but we always overcame them together. Sophia grew into a patient, kind, and wonderful woman. When she landed a job at a big company after college, we celebrated together. Sophia got married and moved out. I wonder how Sophia's doing. Surely, she's being treated well in her new family. I suddenly remembered the day when both families met before the wedding. Sophia's partner was Pete, a nationally renowned professional golfer. I was surprised that she was bringing such a famous person, but they had met at a golf event. Pete looked me straight in the eye and said, "Mother-in-law, I promise to protect Sophia for life once we're married. I want to walk through this life with her." When I looked at my daughter, she had a determined expression and said, "I want to marry him too," so I happily agreed to the marriage. Pete's parents seemed nice, and his father said, "When they're married, they'll live with us, but we'll take good care of your daughter." I was confident I could entrust my precious daughter to them. So Sophia married into Pete's family, about a 3-hour drive from where I lived. For a while after Sophia got married, she would reply quickly if I sent a "How are you?" message. But about a month after she moved, her replies gradually stopped coming. Worried, I checked Pete's official social media and saw them attending occasional events and parties together, looking like a happy couple. Seeing my daughter's smiling face in the photos reassured me. I tried to think that no news was good news. One summer day, more than 6 months after Sophia had married, I called her cell phone. But all I got was a message saying, "This number is no longer in service." Come to think of it, she hadn't replied to my messages for a while either. Is she really okay? What if something's happened to her? Once I started thinking like that, I couldn't sit still. I got in my car and drove to her in-laws' house, desperate to see her. I parked near the house and rang the doorbell. But no one came out, maybe they weren't home. It was a scorching day, with temperatures over 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Wiping away my sweat, I pressed the intercom button again. Then I heard a sound from the garden. Thinking it might be one of the family members, I hurried around to the garden. Ha! Sophia! There was my daughter, crawling out of a storage shed in the garden. Mom! Sophia's eyes widened in surprise when she saw me. Her face was much thinner than when I'd last seen her 6 months ago. She looked so different I almost didn't recognize her. Sophia seemed dizzy and stumbled. As I rushed to support her, I caught sight of the inside of the shed. What's this? What's going on? Inside the small shed was a thin mattress. There were water bottles and clothes around, suggesting someone was living there. I glanced at the thermometer on the wall. It read over 105 degrees Fahrenheit. Don't tell me you're sleeping here. Why? My daughter's eyes filled with tears. They told me no one but family is allowed in the house. Then she covered her face with her hands and burst into tears. I quickly led her to the shade and offered her a cold drink. What on earth happened? Tell me everything. As I encouraged her, Sophia began to speak between sobs. Right after we got married, the family told me to quit my job. I refused at first, but then my in-laws started saying harsh things to me. Sophia explained that she was forced to quit her job, and when she refused, the mistreatment began. They said if I didn't obey, they wouldn't accept me as a daughter-in-law, she said. Even though she quit her job with a heavy heart, things only escalated. After a month of marriage, my father-in-law finally ordered me, "You're not family, so you can't enter the house." Live in the shed. My daughter wasn't allowed to eat meals with the family and wasn't given much food. They wouldn't let her use the bath, so she had to wash herself with the garden hose. Her once glossy hair was now damaged beyond repair. My mother-in-law says I'm only allowed in the house to do chores, she continued. I have to do all the housework under their supervision. I'm like a servant. Oh, honey. Doesn't Pete stand up for you? Sophia shook her head. He always pretends not to see. He ignores me when I try to talk to him. But when there are events or parties, I'm taken out and told to pretend we're a happy couple. What Sophia was telling me was too horrible to believe, but the exhausted state of my daughter in front of me and the condition of the storage shed told me it was all true. Why did you go along with what they said? You should have run away sooner. Sophia started trembling and crying. Because father-in-law threatened that he could take away your job anytime. My job? Yes. Father-in-law said he knows someone important at your workplace. He said he could have you fired anytime. I couldn't let you lose the job you've had for years because of me. Oh, my poor girl. She had endured this hell thinking of me. And Pete. After listening to everything my daughter had to say, I finally lost it. How dare they treat my daughter like this? I'll never, ever forgive them. I put my hands on my daughter's shoulders and looked her straight in the eye. We're getting out of this house right now. Come on, let's go. And just like that, I put my daughter in the car and left her in-laws' house. We disappeared from their sight. To prevent them from coming to our house, I decided to let my daughter rest at a hotel. "It's been so long since I slept in a bed," she mumbled sadly before falling into an exhausted sleep. As I watched her, I began preparing my revenge on them. That night, I got a call from Pete. When I ignored it, his parents started calling too. But I didn't answer any of them. According to the neighbors, the three of them were making a fuss in front of our empty house the day after I took my daughter away. I still didn't answer their calls. 3 days later, I finally decided to answer Pete's call. "You finally picked up. You took Sophia, didn't you?" Pete yelled at me from the moment I answered. There wasn't a trace of the kind demeanor he'd shown before. I maintained a firm attitude and replied, "Yes, I did. Bring Sophia back right now. I need to take her to a charity event today." He was irritably demanding, but I ignored that and questioned him about how they had treated my daughter at their house. He snorted. "That's her fault for not getting along with my parents. Even so, making her sleep in a scorching hot shed is going too far. At least she had a roof over her head, right? Anyway, bring that servant back as soon as possible. My parents are angry too." I ignored Pete's ranting and hung up. A few hours later, I was at the venue of the charity event Pete was supposed to attend. Trying not to be noticed, I watched him and his parents from afar. During an interview at the venue, he was asked, "Where's your lovely wife today?" Pete turned pale and stammered, "She's not feeling well today." That's when I boldly stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention for a moment? I am the mother of Sophia, the wife of Pete standing over there." As I introduced myself, the attention of the venue turned to me. Pete and his parents, who were at the edge of the venue, looked shocked. "My daughter said she has something she wants to tell everyone, so please look at the screen." As I said this and operated the computer provided, Sophia's face was projected onto the large screen set up at the venue. I had connected the venue with the hotel where Sophia was hiding. Sophia gave a brief greeting and then got to the point. "Everyone, since I became Pete's wife, I've been terribly mistreated at home. They wouldn't let me in the house, saying I was an outsider, and made me live in the garden shed even in the middle of summer. When I displayed the photos I had taken of the inside of the shed when I rescued my daughter on another monitor, I could sense the venue buzzing with shock. I've also recorded the abusive things my husband and in-laws said to me." Sophia said this and played a voice recorder. "Don't act so high and mighty, you outsider. You're not family. You're a slave." As such unbearable audio played, the three of them rushed over, trying to stop the playback. However, the other participants stood in their way and stopped them. "This is all fabricated. Everyone, it's all lies," Pete desperately shouted, but at this point, I played the recording of our earlier phone call. At least she had a roof over her head, right? Anyway, bring that servant back as soon as possible. As these words echoed through the venue, Pete's face grew paler and paler. I took a breath and picked up the microphone. The reason my daughter obeyed them was because her father-in-law threatened that he could take away her mother's job at any time. My daughter endured all this to protect me. Isn't that right, father-in-law? When I glared at Pete's father, he let out a groan. But when I looked into it, you had no connections with the upper management of my company at all. You were lying and tormenting my daughter, weren't you? As I said this with tears in my voice, voices of condemnation rose from the venue. Then Sophia spoke again. There's more I want everyone to know. This is what I witnessed when I went out shopping on my mother-in-law's orders. As Sophia said this, I displayed a photo on the monitor. It showed Pete entering a hotel with his arm around a woman. Then someone in the venue shouted, "Isn't that the pro golfer Skylar?" When Pete's affair and the fact that his partner was also a professional golfer became known, the venue was in an uproar. Sophia quietly continued, "My husband cheated on me, and my in-laws oppressed me. I can't take it anymore. I'm divorcing my husband and cutting ties with his family." Pete and his parents, criticized and looked at coldly by the charity event participants, shrank back. Then someone stepped forward. It was Mr. Horton, the president of a local big company that was Pete's major sponsor. Pete looked startled, but Mr. Horton said in an angry tone, "Pete, I'm very disappointed. To think you were treating my friend's daughter so terribly." "Ha! Your friend's daughter. He and I were former classmates and good friends. We reunited at your wedding." Pete and his parents turned pale and started shaking. Mr. Horton's face contorted as he declared, "Pete, I'm withdrawing my sponsorship. Mr. Horton, please reconsider." Just after Pete shouted this, voices from the venue started chiming in, "We're withdrawing too." Pete and his parents turned blue and panicked, but they came to the front of the screen and got down on their knees before Sophia. "We're so sorry. Please forgive us. I'll cut ties with Skylar and treasure you from now on." But my daughter just shook her head at their behavior. Then Pete and his parents came to me. "Mother-in-law, please persuade Mr. Horton. If he withdraws his sponsorship, I won't be able to continue as a professional golfer." At that, I shouted, "I will never forgive you for what you did to Sophia. I don't care what happens to you." Then I bowed to the entire venue and left. After that, Sophia and Pete's divorce was finalized. What Pete and his parents had done was quickly spread to the public by the event participants. Pete was reported on, including the affair, and with all his sponsors gone, he couldn't continue as a professional golfer. His affair partner retired too. Sophia demanded $30,000 each from them as compensation for the affair. The in-laws were rumored in the neighborhood as the heartless family that made their daughter-in-law live in a shed, and they had to sell their house and move away. Pete, who became unemployed, and his parents, who had been completely dependent on his income, are now living in an old apartment and working part-time jobs from morning till night. I think it's all their own doing. Meanwhile, Sophia and I are living together now. Sophia has managed to recover and is now working at Mr. Horton's company. I hope to watch over my daughter until she can
Ding dong, clatter, clatter, bang, bang, bang. Are you kidding me? Let me in right now. Do you want everyone to see me causing a scene here? Is this how you treat your husband who's been working on Christmas and comes home to this mess? My husband was furious, pounding on the gate of my family's home. Christmas is usually a special time for us, just before the big day. I accidentally found an envelope recently that revealed my husband's betrayals. As a wife and mother, I've been living through miserable and hopeless days since then. He had been working late, he said, but really he was spending our money on his girlfriend. He barely even bought presents for our kids. I couldn't stand it anymore. I opened the door and confronted him in front of my family. And then, what? What's going on? I'm just an ordinary housewife, living with my husband and 2 children. Depending on your values, some people might spend Christmas Eve with a boyfriend or girlfriend and Christmas Day with their family. And that's how it was for me. I have a brother and a sister, and since we were young, if any of us were dating someone, we'd spend Christmas Eve with them. Our family does things a bit differently from others. We don't always celebrate Christmas on the 25th because of our jobs. Both our parents and us have work that keeps us busy even on holidays. So instead, we made our own tradition, celebrating Christmas when we all had time off during the winter break. We'd cook together, enjoy cake, and watch special year-end TV shows. As we grew up and became independent, my brother, sister, and I kept up this tradition in our own ways. A few years ago, I got married and had children of my own. At first, celebrating Christmas Eve with my husband and our child was a joyful time. But over time, our relationship changed from being romantic partners to focusing more on our family as a whole. Christmas Eve started to feel more like a routine than a special occasion. Eventually, we both agreed that our children's happiness was what mattered most at Christmas. Any discussion about what to do on Christmas Eve slowly faded away, so when my husband said, "Sorry, I might be stuck at work overnight on the 24th. The kids celebrate Christmas on the 25th, right? I'll try to be back by then," it felt like a natural progression of how our Christmas traditions had evolved. I wasn't particularly emotional when I realized my husband wouldn't be home for Christmas Eve. It was just another sign of how our relationship had changed over time. Despite this, I still love him deeply and I'm content with our life together. So I focused on preparing for our kids' Christmas alone, considering it another form of happiness. Hey, is this all the money we have for living expenses this month? Did something unusual happen with your paycheck? I hate to sound critical, but expenses always pile up at year-end. I was hoping we could stretch our budget a bit more with Christmas coming up in about a month. I was shocked to see that the money my husband gave for living expenses was significantly less than usual. I quickly pleaded with him. If I could have managed it, I would have done so already. Things are tight on my end too. There are work-related parties and expenses that I have to cover upfront for the new year. Do you think I enjoy cutting back like this? Managing our budget with limited resources is also a crucial part of being a housewife, isn't it? My husband seemed visibly frustrated and avoided looking at me or talking further. You're right, sorry. I'll do my best too. But it's almost Christmas, right? The kids are eagerly waiting for their special presents. Please, for their sake, let's make this time of year special. I don't want us to not afford their gifts. In our family, there's a rule. Normally, if the kids want something, they have to explain why they need it. But for birthdays and Christmas, they can ask for anything without conditions. That's why I wanted to ensure we have enough money for them, thinking about how much they love Christmas. Honey, let's be a bit more careful with our spending. Kids, what do you want for Christmas? My husband sighed loudly and called the kids over. I want a cartoon DVD set, but I also want a picture book about trains, Dad. Which one do you think is better? Well, the book, definitely. It will help you learn to read, and you can share it with your friends at their houses. You could even read it to younger friends. You'd be such a cool big boy. I really want a new doll set so I can feed it and sleep with it, but my crayons broke recently and now I can't draw. I wonder which wish Santa will grant. I think crayons would be great, Lena. You're so talented at drawing, and I love seeing your artwork. Ask Santa for some really nice ones, even better than the ones you had before. But what about the dolls? Can't you listen to what I want? Santa only visits good children. Naughty kids who are selfish get nothing. I'll ask for crayons. While pretending to listen to the kids, my husband clearly pushed them towards the cheaper options. Aaron's gift can be from a used bookstore, and Lena's gift can be from the dollar store. This way, we won't have to spend extra money on Christmas. Do you think spending money is the only solution? How foolish, he sneered, making sure only I could hear him. Extra expenses? That's not saving money. My husband called our children's eagerly anticipated presents extra expenses, manipulating their innocent minds to suit his agenda. I began to deeply resent such behavior from my husband. Then, after a while, Mom, look, a sparkly letter. It was in Dad's work bag. Could it be from Santa? While my husband was in the bath, my daughter had apparently opened his work bag and excitedly showed me the beautifully decorated envelope she found. You shouldn't have taken that without asking. Give it here and I'll put it back, okay? What could it be? I took the envelope from my daughter. Since it hadn't been opened, curiosity got the better of me and I peeked inside. a reservation for a Christmas dinner for 2 at a hotel on the 24th. But he was supposed to be working overnight on the 24th. Several questions raced through my mind. Just then, my husband's phone made a notification sound. Startled, I glanced over at his phone. It seemed to be getting a flurry of messages in a short span of time. Normally, I wouldn't pay much attention to his phone or how often it rang, but with a sense of unease, I reached for it. What's going on? My eyes fixed on the screen. All the messages flooding my husband's phone were from someone named Nancy. Judging by the selfie that appeared to be her profile picture, she was much younger than me. Although I couldn't see the content of the messages, the heart emojis made it clear they were not just from a casual acquaintance. It seemed too coincidental. A small dark suspicion about my husband began to grow within me. Once I started doubting him, it was hard to let go of those feelings. For the next few days, I found myself sneaking peeks at my husband's phone. Those days were enough to turn my suspicions into conviction. Nancy was likely my husband's mistress, and he planned to spend the Christmas dinner with her on the 24th. He even hinted at an extra special gift for her, their excitement for each other uncontainable. To get more concrete information, I hired a private investigator. Catching my overly confident husband in the act seemed easy, and the results came back quickly. According to the investigation, Nancy was a temp at my husband's company. They had started their affair a month ago, and all the nights he told me he was working late were actually spent with Nancy. The recent drastic cut in our living expenses was likely to fund his affair with her. Clutching the investigator's report, tears of frustration overflowed. In just 1 month, my husband had come to prioritize another woman over his family. My efforts in taking care of the house, believing he was busy with work, and our children's kindness in holding back their desire to play with their father, all felt unbearably pathetic. The shock of my husband's betrayal was too significant to ignore. I didn't know what to do at first, but I have a plan of my own. I won't let this slide without a fight. Wiping away my tears, I stood up energetically and began to prepare my own special gift for my husband. On the morning of December 24th, I sent off my husband as usual, then I headed to my parents' house with the kids. Welcome. It's been so long since we've all been together like this. It feels just like when you, your brother, and your sister used to live here, my mom said. Spending quality time with Dad is great, but this year felt especially exciting. At my parents' house, they were delighted by the festive Christmas atmosphere, enjoying decorating a large Christmas tree they had pulled out of storage. With the kids, we spent the entire day having a fun Christmas party. The next morning, the kids were ecstatic about the presents placed at the base of the Christmas tree they had decorated. For my son, I got a DVD and a picture book, and for my daughter, a doll and crayons. We told them these gifts were from Santa and also from Grandpa and Grandma. The kids played happily with their new toys while the adults watched them with smiles. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. I looked at my phone and saw I had a call. I stepped outside to answer it. It was my husband, sounding very upset. Hey, where are you? I just got home from work, but my key doesn't fit the lock, and the doorbell isn't working. What's going on? I could hear him messing with the door handle through the phone. Calm down, you're making a lot of noise. No one is there because we don't live there anymore. We finished moving out yesterday. You were too busy with work to notice, I guess. By the way, you've been shaking that doorknob for a while. Isn't that kind of like trying to break in? If you break the door, it's not my problem. I laughed at him. Even though he was still confused, he realized I had tricked him and started yelling angrily. Don't mess with me, doing all this without telling me. Where did you put my stuff? Bring it back now. All your things were taken by your parents yesterday. They kept apologizing to me, saying how sorry they were for what you did. Make sure to apologize to them when you get back. What? Huh? After finding out about my husband's affair, I told both our families everything. I explained how he was obsessed with a younger woman named Nancy, spending our money on her instead of on our family. He even cut down on our living expenses and the kids' Christmas gifts. He lied about working overnight just to be with her, and I decided to ask for a divorce. After I told everyone through tears, my parents, his parents, our siblings, and even the kids supported my decision. So we moved out of the house on Christmas Eve while my mother took care of the children. Our siblings also helped with the move. With everyone's help, we emptied the house quickly, which brings us to now. So everyone knows what you've done, and no one in the family is on your side. You caused this mess, and now you have to deal with it. I explained everything to my husband clearly. By the time I finished explaining everything, my husband was furious and started shouting at me. You worthless woman, your disrespectful attitude towards me, your husband, is the real problem here. I am the precious only son, you know. Blaming others while you're no saint yourself, acting all high and mighty. My parents siding with you. Ha, you must have played the victim and cried to them. Who do you think my parents will ultimately believe, their precious son or some outsider woman? You're as foolish as ever, Hava. I'll be demanding alimony from you right away. Oh really? Then go ahead and talk to them now. Here, be my guest." Saying that, I turned on the speakerphone on my cell. "Then I never thought you were such a rotten person." Are those the words of someone who has committed adultery? You are the worst. You're the shame of our family. Where did it all go wrong? May and Lars, who had been by my side during the call, unleashed their anger at my husband over the phone. "Dad, Mom, why are you with her?" My husband began to tremble, utterly taken aback by the unexpected rebuke from his parents. "Why? Because it's Christmas. Maitline, who is back at her parents' house, invited us to spend the day with her. Even though we are the parents of the man who betrayed his family. Do you understand how Maitline felt all this time? While you were betraying her, she was working hard to take care of the children on her own. We've never been so ashamed and embarrassed of you. We won't defend you unconditionally. You're an adult and made your choices. Do what you want, but don't involve us again. We refuse to be used by you." May and Lars scolded him, their voices trembling with anger. Their words made me so happy I couldn't hold back my tears. "What? You're at Maitline's parents' house. Anyway, I'm coming over, so listen to my side of the story. It's unfair to only hear one side at times like these, right? You'll see who the real victim is, right, Dad?" Regardless of our situation, my husband tried to win his parents over, but it was pointless. Without listening to his claims, my father-in-law hung up and turned off the phone after saying a few words to me. Then he turned off all our phones, including Maitline's, and said, "Let's go back inside. The kids are waiting for their mom." My father-in-law said this with a gentle smile, and my mother-in-law gently patted my back. We all went back inside together. We then had the most enjoyable Christmas party ever, with delicious food, cake, and the children singing and dancing. As the night went on and the children fell asleep, the adults were relaxing when the doorbell started ringing non-stop. Tension filled the room. Everyone knew who would show up uninvited at this hour. "Yes, it's me. Open the door. Are you going to leave me out in the cold on a winter night?" My husband not only kept pressing the doorbell but also started rattling the doorknob as if he might break it. Panic set in, and I was about to go to the door when my parents stopped me. I looked at everyone, nodded, and decided to speak to my husband through the door. "Did you forget? Christmas Eve is for lovers and Christmas is for family, right? We're all having a lovely Christmas together as a family. Did you have a nice Christmas Eve with Nancy? Now that we're strangers, I don't care what happens to you today. If you don't want to sleep outside in the cold, just leave. Don't provoke me. Should I call the police? Spread rumors in the neighborhood that a cruel wife kicked out her husband for no reason. Open this door right now." No matter what I said, my husband refused to listen and continued causing a scene outside. I started feeling afraid at his persistence. Trembling, my father-in-law smoothly stood up. He exchanged glances with my mother-in-law, who also rose to follow him. My parents and I hurried to the front door with them. When my father opened the door, expecting me to give in, my husband stood there defiantly. "Long time no see, Dad," my husband said smugly. "It's not good to see you. Stop pretending we're friends. You're no longer a son to us, just someone who hurt our family," my father interrupted coldly. My mother joined in, causing a scene at this hour. "Do you even know what time it is? It's incredibly rude. The kids have been asleep for hours. You're not fit to be their father." She glared at him sternly. My husband was shocked to see my usually gentle mother so stern. "I won't let my grandchildren see this anymore. Leave. You're a nuisance. You're no longer part of this family." My father-in-law spoke calmly but with anger, making it clear my husband had to leave. My husband glared at us, looking like he might explode. "I'm calling the police right now," my mother-in-law said firmly. Seeing her pick up the phone, my husband panicked and fled without saying a word of apology. It was another stark reminder of who he truly was. I didn't cry anymore, but I felt an emptiness inside, questioning the purpose of everything I had been through until then. "How about some warm tea, and then you can get some rest?" My mother gently touched my shoulder with a kind smile. Everyone welcomed me back with warmth and understanding. I went to my room, grateful for the unwavering support of my family. Meanwhile, my husband, now without a home, went to his parents' house. They had changed the locks after hearing my side of the story, so he couldn't get in. They turned him away when they returned, unwilling to let a stranger into their home. Left out in the cold, my husband finally realized the gravity of his actions and his parents' words. Now he sincerely regrets his actions and has agreed to the divorce and alimony. I had a lawyer ready just in case, but thankfully it didn't turn into a messy legal battle. After the divorce was finalized, I started a new life at my parents' house with my children. I'm focused on my work and raising my kids with the loving support of my parents. It's busy, but every day feels meaningful. Although I won't see my ex-husband again, I stay in touch with my in-laws. They're wonderful grandparents to my children and a great support to me. Even though we're no longer family on paper, I hope they'll always be part of our lives and continue to watch over the children as they grow. Do you both have everything? Let's go. Don't forget to say goodbye to Grandma and Grandpa. Bye. I silently prayed for these ordinary, peaceful days to last forever and looked forward to celebrating next Christmas together as a family, seeing my children's happy smiles.
A waitress accidentally dropped a cup of coffee on a customer. While cleaning the table, she froze upon noticing something written on the stained napkin. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air of the small establishment at the corner of Fifth Avenue and Main Street. Kinsley, a middle-aged waitress with grey hair tied up in a messy bun, moved between the tables with the agility of someone who knew every inch of that place. Her blue eyes, marked by expression lines, scanned the environment in search of customers needing service. That's when she noticed a woman sitting alone in a discreet corner, nervously fiddling with her phone. Kinsley approached, skillfully balancing a tray with a steaming cup. "Good morning, dear. Here's your coffee, strong just as you requested. Do you need anything else?" Kinsley asked with a warm smile, trying to make eye contact with the customer. The woman, who Kinsley would later know as Eva, briefly looked up. She was about 30 years old, with wavy brown hair framing a pale and tense face. Her hands trembled slightly as she tightly held her phone. Eva opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Kinsley stumbled on a crease in the worn-out carpet. In a split second, the cup flew off her tray, spilling the hot liquid onto the table and the customer. "Oh my God! I'm so sorry," Kinsley exclaimed, mortified. She quickly grabbed a handful of napkins from her apron pocket and began frantically cleaning the table and Eva's clothes. "I'm so clumsy sometimes, I don't know where my mind was." Surprisingly, Eva didn't seem upset. Her wide eyes had an expression that was almost relieved. "It's okay, it was just an accident," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Kinsley continued cleaning, determined to fix her mistake. That's when her eyes caught something that made her heart race. On one of the coffee-stained napkins, written with an almost dry pen, was a single word: help. Kinsley froze, her gaze shifting between the napkin and Eva's face. The young woman realized that Kinsley had seen the message and, with an almost imperceptible movement, brought her finger to her lips, pleading for silence. I'll go get more napkins," Kinsley stammered, struggling to maintain her composure. Her mind raced, trying to process what was happening. Who was this woman? Why did she need help? And who was she hiding from? As she moved towards the counter, Kinsley heard the bell on the door chime. A tall, muscular man entered the cafe, his dark eyes scanning the room with an intensity that made Kinsley shiver. He was wearing a black leather jacket, and his hands were shoved into his pockets as if he was hiding something. Kinsley realized that the man who had just entered was looking for someone, his gaze sweeping the place with a threatening presence that filled the small cafe. With her heart racing, she glanced quickly at the customer, who seemed to shrink in her seat. In a sudden burst of courage, Kinsley decided to act. She leaned over as if she were cleaning more spilled coffee, using her own body to shield the woman. "The bathroom. Go there now. I'll deal with him and meet you there in a minute," Kinsley whispered, barely moving her lips. The woman nodded almost imperceptibly, getting up with a forced calm and heading to the bathroom. Kinsley took a deep breath, preparing herself to face the intimidating man. She walked back to the counter, forcing a friendly smile. "Sorry for the wait, sir. How can I help you?" Kinsley asked, her voice surprisingly steady. The man frowned, his eyes still searching the cafe. "I'm looking for someone, a young woman, brown hair. It's urgent." Kinsley pretended to think for a moment, her mind working frantically to come up with a convincing distraction. She noticed an empty cup at the far end of the counter and got an idea. "You know, now that you mention it, I think I saw someone like that leaving in a hurry about 10 minutes ago. She seemed to be heading towards the park," Kinsley lied, praying that her voice wouldn't tremble. The man hesitated, clearly suspicious. Kinsley seized the opportunity to continue her act, moving to clean the empty cup and speaking casually over her shoulder. She seemed pretty agitated, left her coffee half-finished and rushed out. "Not something you see every day around here," Kinsley added, hoping the details would make her story more believable. After what felt like an eternity, the man finally nodded. "Thanks for the information," he muttered, turning to leave. Kinsley watched, tense, as he walked towards the door, the bell chiming again as he exited. As soon as the door closed, Kinsley let out a shaky sigh of relief. Wasting no time, she quickly headed to the bathroom, her heart still pounding in her chest. When she entered, she found the woman leaning against the wall, visibly trembling. "It's okay now, don't worry. By the way, my name is Kinsley. He's gone." "You're safe here," Kinsley said softly, locking the door behind her. The woman swallowed hard, tears shining in her eyes. I'm Eva. Thank you for helping me. But you have no idea what danger you've put yourself in," she stammered. Kinsley approached cautiously, her eyes full of concern. "Eva, what's going on? Why is that man after you?" she asked. Eva took a deep breath, seeming to gather courage. "I'm in a lot of trouble. This man is very dangerous and powerful. There are others involved. It's an entire network against me, and she whispered, her voice barely audible. Before Eva could finish, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed outside the bathroom. The two women froze, exchanging panicked looks. The hallway went silent for a moment, and then slowly the door handle began to turn. Kinsley's heart raced as the handle started to move. With a quick motion, she whispered to Eva, "Stay here. Don't make a sound." She waited for Eva to lock herself in one of the bathroom stalls before unlocking the door. As soon as the door opened, the man who had been chasing Eva stood there, his face momentarily showing surprise. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I was just... well, you know, women's issues," Kinsley exclaimed, pretending to be embarrassed, laughing nervously, hoping the lie would be enough to send him away. The man frowned, his dark eyes scanning Kinsley's face. "I thought you said you saw her heading to the park," he said, his voice laced with suspicion. Kinsley felt a drop of sweat run down her back, but she kept her composure. "Yes, I did. But that was before I came to the bathroom." "Why? Did something happen?" "A friend of mine was at the park looking for her. He didn't see anyone matching the description," the man replied slowly, his eyes never leaving Kinsley's face. Kinsley felt the panic rising, but forced a smile. "Well, maybe she changed direction, or maybe I was mistaken. I see so many faces every day I might have gotten confused." She shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. At that moment, Kinsley had an idea. "You know what? I'm about to take a break. Why don't you come with me to the kitchen? I can offer you a coffee while you wait. Maybe your friend will show up," she said loudly, subtly signaling to Eva, who was hiding behind the bathroom door, to hide better. In the kitchen, Kinsley started making the coffee, keeping the man distracted with casual conversation. "So, this friend of yours, is she in some kind of trouble? You seemed worried about her." The man hesitated for a moment before answering. "She's been unstable lately. I'm concerned about her." Kinsley nodded, pretending to be sympathetic. "I understand. That must be tough. I hope you find her soon." As she spoke, she saw out of the corner of her eye Eva hiding in the restaurant's storage area. "Just a moment," Kinsley said to the man. "I need to close the kitchen door. It's part of the regulations." She said this while closing the kitchen door to block the entrance to the storage area so the man wouldn't go in there. However, Kinsley needed to grab some supplies from one of the cabinets and turned to make the coffee. She noticed that the man was very quiet, and when she turned around, she saw that he was no longer in the kitchen. Her heart raced when she saw him returning from the bathroom, holding something in his hand. "I found this on the bathroom floor. It belonged to my friend. Are you sure she left without finishing her coffee?" he said, his voice dangerously calm. In his hand was a delicate, unmistakably feminine handkerchief. Kinsley watched in horror as he examined the handkerchief closely, his fingers tracing a familiar pattern on the fabric. His eyes narrowed dangerously as he murmured, "Interesting. I must have been mistaken then." Kinsley felt her stomach churn as the man inspected the handkerchief. She knew she needed to act quickly to protect Eva. With a forced smile, she tried to divert his attention. "Well, as I mentioned, I see so many faces every day. Maybe your friend left the handkerchief behind before leaving." But the man didn't seem convinced. His eyes narrowed and he took a threatening step towards Kinsley. "I want to see the security footage," he demanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Now." Kinsley hesitated for a moment, her mind racing to find a way out. "The cameras, well, they don't always work properly," she stammered. But the man was already moving towards the small security room at the back of the cafe. Kinsley followed him, her heart pounding so hard she feared he might hear it. How can I be sure you have authorization to view this footage? Kinsley asked, trying to buy time as they entered the room filled with monitors. The man turned to her, his eyes glinting dangerously. Do you really want to question my authority right now? He growled. Kinsley swallowed hard and moved to the main console, her hands trembling slightly. As she pretended to search for the correct footage, Kinsley discreetly began deleting the recordings from the last 30 minutes. She kept up forced conversation, hoping to distract the man. You know, these cameras are so old, sometimes they just stop recording for hours. It's a real problem for the cafe's security. The man grunted in response, his eyes fixed on the screens. Kinsley continued erasing the footage as quickly as she could, her heart pounding in her chest. This is taking too long, the man complained, stepping closer to the console. At that moment, the door to the security room opened. A security guard entered, looking surprised to see Kinsley and the stranger there. What's going on here? He asked, his hand instinctively moving to the holster on his hip. Kinsley froze, her finger just millimeters from the button that would complete the deletion of the footage. Just checking some footage for this gentleman, Kinsley said quickly, forcing a smile. He lost a valuable item, and we're trying to see if the cameras caught anything. The guard frowned, clearly suspicious. That's not standard procedure, he began, but the man interrupted him. There's no problem here, he said, his voice smooth but with an underlying threat. We're all friends here, right? He gave Kinsley a meaningful look, and she nodded frantically. The guard hesitated for a moment, looking between Kinsley and the man. Finally, he shrugged. All right, but don't take too long. This area is restricted. With that, he left, closing the door behind him. Kinsley let out a shaky sigh of relief, taking advantage of the distraction to press the final button, erasing the last of the incriminating footage. She turned to the man, ready to announce that the footage had mysteriously disappeared, when a soft, steady buzzing sound filled the room. She froze, recognizing the noise. It was like an old alarm clock, reminding her of something terrible. The cafe had an extra security system, an emergency backup of all recordings. It was like having a hidden photo album, keeping all the memories she had just tried to erase. Her eyes widened in horror as she realized that all the footage she had just deleted was about to reappear on the screens, like ghosts coming back to haunt her. Oh my God. The footage I erased is going to come back into the system. What am I going to do now? Kinsley thought, feeling panic rise in her chest. What's that noise? The man asked, his eyes narrowing suspiciously. Kinsley felt the blood freeze in her veins, but she forced herself to stay calm. With a tense smile, she turned to the man. Oh, that? It's just the system doing a routine check, nothing to worry about. She gestured towards the security guard who had just returned. Why don't you and the guard take a look at the footage? I need to check something in the kitchen quickly. Before either man could protest, Kinsley hurried out of the security room, her heart pounding in her chest. Oh my God, that was close. I hope he doesn't find out anything before I can help Eva. She looked so scared, she murmured to herself, running towards the pantry. When Kinsley reached the pantry, she quietly opened the door, finding Eva huddled between the supply boxes. Come on, we have to get out of here now, Kinsley whispered urgently, extending her hand to help Eva up. Eva looked at her with a mix of fear and gratitude. But what about your job? You barely know me, Eva stammered, hesitant to accept the help. Kinsley shook her head firmly. That doesn't matter now. Your safety is more important than any job, she replied, gently pulling Eva and guiding her out of the pantry. The two women moved silently through the kitchen, with Kinsley carefully checking each corner before moving forward. Reaching the back of the cafe, Kinsley grabbed her keys and opened the door that led to the employee parking lot. The fresh morning air hit them, bringing a false sense of freedom. Kinsley pressed the alarm button on her old car, a worn-out sedan that had seen better days. Get in quickly, Kinsley instructed, opening the passenger door for Eva before running to the driver's side. Her hands trembled as she tried to insert the key into the ignition. Come on, she murmured, turning the key. The engine coughed and sputtered but wouldn't start. Eva nervously glanced at the cafe door. He's going to find us. Maybe I should turn myself in. I can't put you in danger, she said, fear evident in her voice. Kinsley shook her head vehemently, still struggling with the ignition. Don't even think about it, we're getting out of here together. She turned the key again, silently praying. At that moment, the cafe door burst open violently. The man came out, his eyes scanning the parking lot with a predatory intensity. Kinsley felt her heart stop as his gaze locked onto their car. Slowly, like an animal cornering its prey, he began walking towards the vehicle. Oh no, Kinsley muttered, frantically turning the key. The engine continued to cough and sputter, refusing to start. Eva let out a small cry of fear, her eyes fixed on the man approaching. Finally, with a roar of protest, the engine came to life. Kinsley wasted no time shifting gears and pressing the accelerator to the floor. The car shot forward through the parking lot, the tires screeching on the asphalt. Kinsley maneuvered skillfully, narrowly avoiding a parked car. As they sped out of the parking lot, Kinsley glanced in the rearview mirror, her heart nearly stopping at what she saw. The man was standing in the middle of the lot, his gaze locked directly on the mirror. A cold smile spread across his face, and he raised his hand as if waving a threatening goodbye. He saw us, and something tells me this is just the beginning of our troubles, Kinsley gasped, pressing the accelerator even harder. Kinsley's old sedan roared through the city streets, the engine protesting against the sudden burst of speed. Kinsley kept her eyes fixed on the road ahead, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Eva, in the passenger seat, was frantically checking the side mirror, her face pale with fear. He's following us! A black car right behind us! Eva screamed, her voice trembling with panic. Kinsley cursed under her breath, taking a sharp right turn. The car skidded, the tires screeching against the asphalt. Hold on, she shouted, accelerating even more as they merged onto a busy avenue. The morning traffic was heavy, with cars honking furiously as Kinsley weaved between them. She could see the black car in the rearview mirror, relentlessly closing in. Their pursuer was a skilled driver, staying close despite the chaotic traffic. Who is this man, Eva? Why is he so determined to catch you? Kinsley asked, making another sharp left turn. Eva swallowed hard, clutching the dashboard as they were tossed from side to side. He's part of a dangerous organization. I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. If he catches me, I'm dead, she explained. Kinsley's heart was pounding. Don't worry, I won't let him catch you, Kinsley said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. At that moment, a huge truck loomed ahead of them, switching lanes without signaling. Kinsley screamed, yanking the steering wheel violently to avoid a collision. The sedan narrowly missed the truck, so close that Kinsley could see the shocked face of the truck driver. My God, I thought we were going to die. Eva gasped, her face white as a sheet. Kinsley didn't respond, focusing on regaining control of the car. Her arms ached from the effort of keeping the vehicle on the road. The black car was still behind them, having skillfully navigated the same obstacle. They continued their frantic escape through the city streets, with Kinsley using every trick she knew to try to shake off their pursuer. She made sharp turns, drove through narrow alleys, and even went the wrong way down a street, causing a wave of furious honking and shouting. But nothing seemed to work. The black car was always there, like a threatening shadow that refused to disappear. There, that's the police station. If we can get there, we'll be safe, Eva suddenly shouted, pointing to a building ahead. Kinsley nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. She sped towards the building, determined to reach safety. But then her heart sank. The traffic light ahead turned red, and a wall of cars blocked the intersection. No, 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 Kinsley shouted, slamming on the brakes. The sedan skidded to a stop just inches from the car in front of them. Trapped in traffic, Kinsley and Eva watched in horror as the black car smoothly pulled up behind them. The driver's door slowly opened. Kinsley felt panic rising in her chest, but a sudden wave of determination took over. Without a second thought, she slammed the accelerator, guiding the car onto the sidewalk and around the stopped traffic. The sedan jolted violently as it climbed the curb, but Kinsley kept control, weaving between shocked pedestrians and light poles. Hold on, we're almost there, she shouted to Eva, who was clutching the dashboard with wide eyes full of fear. With one final effort, Kinsley guided the car back onto the street, skidding to a stop in front of the police station. Without wasting a second, she jumped out of the vehicle, pulling Eva with her. The two women ran towards the entrance, their hearts pounding frantically. Once inside the building, Kinsley rushed to the reception desk, breathless and desperate. "Please, we need help. There's a man chasing us. He's dangerous and—" she exclaimed to the officer on duty. Her words were cut short when the station door opened again. The man who had been chasing them walked in calmly, adjusting his jacket as if arriving for a regular day at work. To Kinsley's horror, she saw several officers greet him with familiarity. "Detective Caleb, what's going on here?" the officer at the desk asked, his voice full of respect. Kinsley felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. She looked at Ava, who was pale and trembling. He's a police officer?" Kinsley whispered in disbelief. Ava nodded slowly, her face a mask of terror. "It's not just that," she murmured. But she didn't have time to explain further, as Caleb approached them, a cold smile on his face. "Ladies, I think there's been a big misunderstanding here. Why don't we talk in private?" he said smoothly. Kinsley stepped forward, placing herself protectively in front of Eva. "We're not going anywhere with you. Everyone here needs to know the truth about this man," she declared, her voice trembling but determined. She turned to the other officers in the room, desperate to make them understand. "This man isn't who you think he is. He's involved in criminal activities. Her words were cut off when Caleb raised his hand, his face a mask of feigned concern. "I'm afraid these ladies are a bit disturbed. Favour is a patient who escaped from a psychiatric institution, and unfortunately, it seems she has dragged this poor waitress into her delusions," he said smoothly. Kinsley watched in horror as the other officers exchanged looks of understanding, some shaking their heads in pity. She could feel the situation slipping out of her control. "No, he's lying. Please, you have to believe us," Kinsley shouted, her desperation growing. But her pleas seemed to fall on deaf ears. Slowly the officers began to move, forming a circle around them. Kinsley could see the suspicion in their eyes, the way their hands moved toward their holsters. "Kinsley, I think we made a terrible mistake coming here," Eva whispered, her voice barely audible. Cornered and with no way out, Kinsley and Eva watched with growing dread as the officers closed in, following Caleb's silent commands. The harsh reality of the situation hit Kinsley like a punch to the stomach. They had run straight into the lion's den, and now they were completely at the mercy of a predator, far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Kinsley felt time slow down as the officers approached. In a burst of adrenaline, she grabbed Eva's hand and yelled, "Run!" The two women sprinted towards the emergency exit, pushing it open with all their strength. The sound of a gunshot rang out, but they didn't stop, stumbling down the stairs. Behind them they could hear shouts and heavy footsteps. Kinsley led Eva through the busy streets, weaving between stunned pedestrians. "Where are we going?" Eva panted, struggling to keep up. "The subway station. I know a place where we can hide. It's in a small town where I was born. I have a friend there, an honest cop who can help us," Kinsley replied, giving Eva the address of the house where she grew up. They hurried down the stairs of the subway station, diving into the rush-hour crowd. Kinsley kept a firm grip on Eva's hand, guiding her through the sea of people. The sound of hurried footsteps and police sirens behind them indicated that Caleb and his men were not far away. The town is just a few stations away. The police officer there, Ezekiel, has been a family friend for years. "If anyone can help us expose Caleb, it's him," Kinsley explained quickly as they squeezed through the turnstile. Eva nodded, her eyes wide with fear and hope. "I hope you're right, Kinsley. I don't know how much more I can take." They ran along the crowded platform, the sound of an approaching train echoing through the tunnels. Kinsley could feel her heart pounding in her chest, adrenaline rushing through her veins. She looked back and saw Caleb emerging from the crowd, his eyes locked on them like a predator focused on its prey. "There he is. The train is coming. We have to get on," Kinsley shouted, pulling Eva harder. The train roared into the station, its doors opening to a wave of passengers getting on and off. Kinsley and Eva rushed towards the nearest door, fighting against the tide of people. But the crowd was relentless, a human wave that separated them. "Kinsley!" Eva shouted, her voice lost in the chaos of the platform. Kinsley turned, horrified to see Eva being pushed away from her by the crowd. She tried to reach her, but it was too late. With a jolt, Kinsley was shoved into the train car, the doors closing in front of her. Through the glass, she saw Eva standing on the platform, her face a mask of panic, and behind her, quickly closing in, was Caleb. "No!" Kinsley screamed, pounding on the glass with her fists. But it was useless. The train began to move, leaving Eva behind, alone and vulnerable. Kinsley felt the world spinning around her as the train picked up speed, leaving Eva and the danger behind. Her heart pounded frantically, guilt and fear threatening to consume her. She needed to think fast, to find a way to help Eva from a distance. When the train stopped at the next station, Kinsley jumped out, her eyes scanning the platform for a safe exit. Without wasting time, she ran back to the train heading in the opposite direction, determined to return to the station where she had lost Eva. After minutes that felt like hours, Kinsley finally arrived at the original station, her eyes desperately searching for any sign of Eva or Caleb. But the platform was eerily calm, with no trace of the chaotic scene from moments before. With her heart sinking, Kinsley realized that both Eva and her pursuer had disappeared. Feeling defeated and more alone than ever, she spotted an emergency staircase and, without hesitation, ran towards it. "My God, where did they go?" "Eva, where are you?" Kinsley murmured to herself, climbing the steps 2 at a time. "I need to find a safe place to think and figure out a way to help Eva. She's counting on me. I can't fail now." Kinsley whispered to herself, pushing herself up the stairs. Emerging onto a side street, Kinsley looked around, desperate for a place to hide. Her eyes landed on a small cafe, almost empty at this hour. Without a second thought, she entered, choosing a table in the farthest corner. With trembling hands, she took out her phone and dialed the number of Ezekiel, the police officer who was a family friend in Millbrook. "Ezekiel, it's Kinsley. I need your help, it's an emergency," she whispered into the phone, her eyes constantly checking the cafe entrance. "I'm caught up in something dangerous, and an innocent woman is in trouble." Quickly, Kinsley explained the situation to Ezekiel, her voice low and urgent. She told him about Eva, about Caleb, and the corruption in the local police. Ezekiel listened in silence, occasionally asking questions to clarify details. "Kinsley, this is serious. Do you have any way to contact Eva?" Ezekiel finally asked, his voice grave. Kinsley closed her eyes, trying to stay calm. "No, I don't have her number. Everything happened too fast, but I'm afraid she's in danger and calling her might make things worse." "Can you find her number?" she asked. Ezekiel sighed heavily on the other end of the line. "You're right to be cautious. Leave that to me, Kinsley. I'll investigate discreetly and see what I can find out about Caleb and his operation. In the meantime, you need to stay safe. Go to your grandmother's house here in town and lock all the doors." After hanging up the phone, Kinsley stood up, her eyes once again scanning the cafe for any sign of danger. Satisfied that she was safe for now, she left, walking quickly towards the subway. At each stop, she looked over her shoulder, half expecting to see Caleb or one of his men. "Please, God, protect Eva. Don't let anything bad happen to her," Kinsley prayed silently as she walked. Finally reaching her grandmother's house, a place in a small town where no one would find her, Kinsley locked the door behind her, leaning against it for a moment as she tried to calm her racing heart. She checked all the windows, making sure they were locked, and then collapsed on the sofa, the exhaustion finally catching up with her. "What have I done? How did a simple waitress like me end up in the middle of all this?" she whispered to the empty apartment. Kinsley was about to get up to make herself some calming tea when a sound made her freeze. Someone was knocking on the door. No, pounding on the door hard enough to make it shake on its hinges. Kinsley's heart leapt into her throat as she stared at the door, paralyzed with fear. Who's there?" she managed to stammer, her voice barely above a whisper. With her heart in her throat, Kinsley slowly approached the door. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the latch, bracing herself for the worst. With a quick motion, she opened the door, only to find Eva, breathless and wide-eyed with fear. "Eva, how did you find me? Are you okay?" Kinsley exclaimed, pulling her inside and quickly shutting the door. Eva collapsed into Kinsley's arms, sobbing with relief and exhaustion. "The address. You mentioned it in the subway." "I remembered. But Kinsley, I think he might have followed me. I'm not sure, but I felt eyes on me the whole way here." she managed to say between sobs. Kinsley guided Eva to the sofa, her own fear momentarily forgotten in the face of her friend's distress. She hurried to close the curtains and check the locks once more, before sitting down beside Eva. "Tell me everything. What happened after we got separated at the station?" Kinsley asked softly, holding Eva's trembling hands. Eva took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "After the train left with you, Caleb caught up to me. He tried to grab me, but I managed to slip away in the chaos of the platform. I ran like never before, Kinsley. I took random trains, buses, anything to try and lose him, but the whole time I felt like he was right behind me, like a shadow I just can't shake." Ava's eyes filled with tears again. "You have no idea what it's like to live like this, Kinsley. Every face on the street looks like one of his men. Every sudden sound makes me jump. I can't sleep, I can barely eat. It's like my life isn't my own anymore." Kinsley felt her heart break for her new friend. She hugged Eva tightly, wishing she could do more to help. "Eva, I'm so sorry. No one should have to go through this. But you're safe here now. This house belongs to my grandmother. No one knows about it. We'll figure out a way to end this, I promise." Eva gently pulled back, her eyes meeting Kinsley's. "You don't understand, Kinsley. It's not just about me. What Caleb is doing, it's much bigger than either of us. There's an entire network of corruption involving police, politicians, businessmen. I stumbled onto this information by accident, and now they're never going to leave me alone. Not until I'm dead or they're sure I'll never talk." She swallowed hard, the fear evident in her voice. Silence fell over the room as Kinsley absorbed Eva's words. The magnitude of the situation was overwhelming. Kinsley suddenly stood up, walking to the window and peeking through a crack in the curtain. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to find us. We need to act. We need to expose all of this before it's too late," Kinsley finally said, turning to Eva with determination in her eyes. Eva looked at her with a mix of hope and fear. "But how? They're everywhere, Kinsley. Who's going to believe us?" Kinsley was about to respond when a sound outside made them both freeze. Heavy footsteps on the front porch, followed by the creak of old wood. The two women exchanged panicked glances. "It could be him. Oh, God help us," Eva whispered, terror clear in her voice. Kinsley's heart was pounding so hard she was sure Eva could hear it. Moving silently, she approached the door, gesturing for Eva to hide. Just as Kinsley was about to take cover, a familiar elderly voice called out from the other side. "Hello, is anyone there? I saw the lights on and got worried." Kinsley let out a sigh of relief, so deep it almost made her dizzy. It was just Mrs. Thompson, her grandmother's neighbor for decades. With trembling hands, she opened the door. "Mrs. Thompson, you gave me such a fright," Kinsley exclaimed, forcing a smile. The elderly woman looked at her with a mix of surprise and relief. "Kinsley, dear, I didn't know you were in town. I saw the lights and thought, well, since your grandmother passed, I've been keeping an eye on the house," Mrs. Thompson explained, her curious eyes peeking over Kinsley's shoulder. Kinsley felt a pang of guilt. Her grandmother had passed away a few months ago, and she hadn't visited the house since. I needed some time away from the city. Thank you for looking after the place, Mrs. Thompson," she improvised. After a few minutes of conversation and promises to visit for tea, Kinsley finally managed to say goodbye to the well-meaning neighbor. Closing the door, she turned to Eva, who was emerging from her hiding spot. "That was close," Kinsley whispered, the relief evident in her voice. "Kinsley, we can't stay here. It's only a matter of time before Caleb finds us. We need to go somewhere truly safe," Eva said, urgency clear in her eyes. Kinsley nodded, an idea forming in her mind. "You're right, and I know exactly where we should go." She grabbed her phone, dialing quickly. "Ezekiel, it's Kinsley. I found Eva, the woman I told you about. We're coming to you now." "Please be ready," she said. The next few minutes were a blur of stealthy movement. Kinsley and Eva slipped through the streets, constantly looking over their shoulders. Finally, exhausted and nervous, they arrived at the police station where Ezekiel worked. It was a small, unassuming building, but to Kinsley, it looked like a beacon of hope. "Here we are. Ezekiel is a good man. He'll help us expose Caleb and all this corruption," Kinsley said, squeezing Eva's hand reassuringly. They entered the police station, the air conditioning a welcome relief after the walk. Kinsley approached the reception desk, her eyes searching for Ezekiel. "We're here to see Detective Ezekiel. He's expecting us," she said to the receptionist. As they waited, Kinsley noticed Eva nervously looking around. "It's going to be okay. We're safe here," she whispered. At that moment, Ezekiel appeared, his face a mixture of concern and determination. "Kinsley, thank God you arrived safely. I did some digging discreetly to avoid alerting the wrong people. We have a lot to discuss," he said, guiding them to a private room. But before Ezekiel could close the door, a movement on the security monitors behind him caught Kinsley's attention. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the familiar figure entering the station's lobby. It was Caleb, his confident stride and determined look indicating he knew exactly what he was looking for. "Oh no, he's here." "Caleb found us," Kinsley gasped, grabbing Eva's arm. Ezekiel reacted quickly to Kinsley's warning. With a swift gesture, he led them to a small supply closet. "Stay here, and don't make a sound," he whispered, closing the door. Kinsley and Eva huddled in the cramped space, their hearts pounding as they listened to Ezekiel walk away. Through the thin wood of the door, they could hear muffled voices, Ezekiel and Caleb's deep, threatening tone. "Detective, I'm looking for 2 women. I believe one of them has come to town. She's an old resident. Her name is Kinsley," Caleb said, his voice falsely cordial. "Kinsley? Little Kinsley? I haven't seen her in years. She was just a little girl the last time I saw her. Why are you looking for her?" Ezekiel's voice sounded confused. There was a tense pause before Caleb responded. "It's a sensitive police matter. Of interest to an agency above this station. I can't give more details. If you see her, please contact me immediately. Here's my card," he said, handing it to the detective. In the closet, Eva gripped Kinsley's hand, the fear palpable between them. Kinsley closed her eyes, silently praying that Ezekiel could handle the situation. Back in the private room, Ezekiel closed the door and turned to the 2 women with a grave expression. "Listen, the situation is more complicated than we thought. Caleb has powerful connections, and without concrete evidence, there's not much we can do officially." Eva sank into a chair, the despair evident on her face. "So that's it? There's nothing we can do?" she asked, her voice trembling with fear. Ezekiel hesitated for a moment, his eyes moving between Kinsley and Eva. "There is a way, but it's risky. Eva, we need you to wear a wire and go to the place where Caleb operates. We need irrefutable evidence of his corruption," he finally said. Kinsley jumped out of her chair, outraged. "No, it's too dangerous. We can't ask Eva to do that." But Eva raised her hand, silencing Kinsley. Her eyes shone with a mix of fear and determination. "If it's the only way to end this, I'll do it," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Ezekiel nodded gravely. "I'll be outside the entire time, ready to step in if anything goes wrong. But we have to be careful. Caleb is smart and dangerous. You need to understand the risks. I don't know how far his connections go, so I'll need solid proof to take him down. But legally, it's difficult to gather evidence so quickly, especially against someone as powerful as he is," said the detective. The next few hours were spent meticulously planning the operation. Ezekiel provided Eva with a discreet listening device and detailed instructions on how to act. Kinsley watched, her stomach churning with worry. "Are you sure about this, Eva? You don't have to do it. We could hide while the detective investigates. What do you think?" Kinsley asked for the umpteenth time as she helped her friend prepare. Eva smiled sadly. "Yes, Kinsley. I have to do this. I can't keep running. It's time to end this." When the time finally came to set the plan in motion, Eva, Kinsley, and Ezekiel headed to the designated location, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Kinsley's heart was pounding so hard she feared it might be heard outside the car. "Remember, at the first sign of real danger, say the safety word through the wire and get out of there. Don't forget to mention as soon as you arrive that you have evidence against everyone stored safely. That will ensure they won't act before talking to you. But remember, your safety is the priority," Ezekiel told Eva. Eva nodded, taking a deep breath before stepping out of the car. Kinsley watched helplessly as her friend walked toward the warehouse. Through the earpiece, she could hear Eva's nervous breathing. Suddenly, just as Eva was about to enter the warehouse, the sound began to break up. Eva! Eva! "Can you hear us?" Kinsley asked urgently, but there was only static on the other side. Eva had entered the warehouse, and the wire was failing. "Oh no! Ezekiel, we lost contact with her," Kinsley murmured, panic rising in her chest. Ezekiel reacted quickly to the loss of contact, his years of police experience kicking in. "Stay calm, Kinsley," he said, grabbing his radio. "Central Unit, this is Detective Ezekiel. Requesting immediate backup at the abandoned warehouse on Industrial Street, number 27. Possible hostage situation, suspect is armed and dangerous." As Ezekiel coordinated the arrival of backup, Kinsley couldn't take her eyes off the warehouse, her heart pounding. What if something goes wrong? What if Eva is in danger? Kinsley whispered, more to herself than to Ezekiel. As if responding to her worries, the wire suddenly crackled back to life with a sharp hiss. Eva's voice, tense but determined, filled the car. "Caleb, I know everything. I have evidence against you and your entire organization." Kinsley and Ezekiel exchanged looks of surprise and relief, leaning closer to listen. Caleb's voice came through, a mix of anger and disbelief. "What are you talking about, Eva? What evidence?" Eva continued, her voice growing more confident. "Documents, recordings, bank transactions. It's all safe with powerful people. Senator Williams, Judge Hernandez, even Police Chief Roberts, they all know the truth now." Kinsley held her breath, amazed at Eva's courage as she listened. Caleb laughed, a cold and calculated sound. "You think you can scare me with those names, Eva? I have twice as many connections. The governor, the attorney general, even members of the FBI are in my pocket. Your evidence means nothing," he said. "You're bluffing," Eva replied, but there was a note of uncertainty in her voice. "I'm not," Caleb shot back, his voice full of confidence. "And if you think you can take me down, you're gravely mistaken. This is much bigger than you can imagine, Eva. You have no idea what you're up against. Now hand over the evidence or face the consequences," he said. The tension in the air was palpable, even through the wire. Kinsley and Ezekiel exchanged worried glances, realizing that the situation was even more complex and dangerous than they had thought. The sound of distant sirens grew louder, and Kinsley saw a fleet of police cars rapidly approaching. Ezekiel stepped out of the car, signaling to the arriving officers. "Surround the building, we have a witness inside with an armed suspect." Kinsley watched, her heart in her throat, as the police officers positioned themselves around the warehouse. Ezekiel coordinated the operation efficiently, his calm yet authoritative voice giving clear orders. Suddenly, the sound of gunfire echoed from inside the warehouse, making Kinsley scream in fear. "Eva, no, please, no!" she cried out, trying to run towards the warehouse. Ezekiel held her back, preventing her from exposing herself to danger. "Team, move in! Repeat, move in!" Ezekiel shouted into his radio. Kinsley watched helplessly as a group of heavily armed officers stormed the warehouse. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. Kinsley could hear shouts and more gunfire coming from inside the building. Kinsley let out a sob of relief as she saw Eva being escorted out of the warehouse, looking shaken but unharmed. Caleb was brought out next, handcuffed and with a look of defeat on his face. The following hours passed in a whirlwind of statements, press briefings, and frantic phone calls. As the sun began to rise, casting a golden light over the city, Kinsley, Eva, and Ezekiel finally had a moment of peace. Sitting in a break room at the police station, exhausted but relieved, they reflected on the events of the night. "Is it really over?" Kinsley asked, still in disbelief. Eva smiled, taking Kinsley's hand. "Thanks to you, Kinsley. If it weren't for your courage and kindness, I never would have made it." Ezekiel nodded, a tired smile on his face. "You both were incredible. Thanks to your testimony, Eva, we're dismantling one of the largest corruption networks this city has ever seen." Kinsley looked out the window, watching the city wake up to a new day, a day that felt more just, more secure. She smiled, feeling a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. "You know, I think I'm going to need a new job after running out in the middle of my shift, but that's okay. Being a waitress seems a bit dull after all this," she said, turning to Eva and Ezekiel. The three of them laughed, the sound of their joy echoing through the room, marking the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. 6 months had passed since that fateful night that changed everything. It was a sunny autumn afternoon, and Kinsley walked through the city streets, noticing how everything seemed different now. People smiled more, and there was a sense of safety in the air that hadn't been there before. Kinsley arrived at her destination, a small cafe on the corner, not too different from the one where it all began. Inside, Ava and Ezekiel were already waiting for her, warm smiles on their faces. "Hey, partner," Eva greeted her, standing up for a hug. "How was your day?" Kinsley smiled as she sat down at the table. "Quiet. It's amazing how much things have changed, isn't it?" Ezekiel nodded, his face showing the pride he felt. "Thanks to you two. Caleb and his entire network are behind bars, where they'll stay for a long time. The city has never been safer." The three friends chatted happily, reminiscing about the events that brought them together and discussing their plans for the future. Ava, who once lived in constant fear, now spoke enthusiastically about her new job as a counselor for crime victims. Kinsley, on the other hand, had found her calling working with at-risk youth, using her experience to inspire positive change. "You know, sometimes I still can't believe all this happened, that a simple spilled cup of coffee could change so many lives," Kinsley said, looking out the window at the city she loved so much. Eva took Kinsley's hand, squeezing it gently. "It wasn't just the coffee, Kinsley. It was your courage, your kindness. You risked everything to help a stranger." Ezekiel raised his cup in a toast. To courage, to friendship, and to making a difference, no matter how small the gesture may seem. The three of them toasted, their laughter blending with the cozy buzz of the cafe. Outside, the city went on with its life, safer and more just, thanks to the brave actions of ordinary people who refused to stand by in the face of injustice. And so, what began with a desperate cry for help ended with friendships forged in the fire of adversity, a transformed city, and proof that sometimes the most unlikely heroes can make the biggest difference. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing you exciting stories almost every day. Don't miss the next surprising narrative that's about to appear on your screen. We're so grateful to have you here with us. Now, you can click on the links that are appearing on the screen right now. We have a special selection just for you, filled with valuable stories and guaranteed entertainment. See you there.